prosecutors contended the judge made errors, talking about the original judge that ruled not to extradite Julian Assange. Prosecutors contended the judge made errors of law when determining whether it would be oppressive to approve his extradition. They also insisted the judge should have notified the U.S. government of her, quote, provisional view so they could offer her assurances to alleviate her concerns. I don't know, Kevin, I know you're not a lawyer, but I've never heard of such a thing. So, like, during a regular murder case, like, should a judge, inform the defense or the prosecution of the judge's provisional view? If it's a one-man grand jury, for example, in the case of Flint, they used a one-man grand jury. Like, is it typical for a judge to be alerting the prosecutor, basically a heads up? Hey, here's where I'm going with this. Here's my preliminary view. So, to give them time to sway me to change my mind. I mean, I've never heard of such a thing, but I haven't heard a lot of things that have been the law has kind of been mangled from the start in this case. Can you kind of talk about that part where the U.S. is arguing, oh, judge, you should have told us your concerns before you ruled because we would have convinced you not to worry?
This may be like how you'll see some prosecutors who will assure judges that they won't pursue the death penalty against a defendant, and like sometimes that can help them in the success of their case, especially if there's questions about how cruel it will be if they are convicted and what they'll go through. But yeah, I mean, it is very bizarre. I mean, the whole logic of it being that she has to tell them, I believe that there is corruption within your case. I believe that the prison system is inhumane and I'm going to rule like this. And is there anything you can tell me to make me believe that the US prison system is not cruel and inhumane? I mean, I don't know how anybody could see assurances after the fact as anything less than trying to conceal the true reality of the way somebody would be treated if they are extradited to the United States. So it's a fundamental problem right now that the US has to deal with. And it's not just isolated to the Assange case, is that basically you have this district court saying that someone cannot go to the United States and face trial without being cruelly and inhumanely treated in a US jail and then later on in a prison, especially if they're accused of some kind of national security related crime and he's being pursued for national security leaking. That's going to be something that is so extraordinary that the judge can't trust the United States to take care of that individual and ensure their well-being. So, I mean, it's an issue of the UK and other European countries having procedures in which they have to consider issues of human rights. And this is not something we find in the US courts, frankly. You don't hear US courts thinking about human rights when they are carrying through cases.
Right. And I want to play Julian's partner, Stella Morris, recently commented on this, and she was explaining, there's a lot of loopholes in what the U.S. government is arguing. So they could technically say he won't be held in Supermax. They could technically say he might be able to serve time in Australia. Let's hear from Stella Morris explaining why the U.S. is not being honest.
The U.S. has said that they don't intend to put Julian in ADX Florence or put him under a regime called SAMS. SAMS is the condition where they put you, basically bury you alive, where you cannot speak to your friends or your family, and even your lawyers are gagged from talking about how you are, what your conditions are, or your case basically in public. And ADX is just one of many Supermax prisons. So when the US says we're not going to place him in ADX, they are not saying that that they will not place him in Supermax. There are multiple prisons that they could choose from. Regardless of those points, it's not actually up to the Department of Justice or the Bureau of Prisons about where they're going to place Julian, because even in their documents to the United Kingdom, they say that this could change once he's in US custody. because in consultation with the head of the CIA may decide that actually he should go to SAMS and he should go to ADX. The CIA is the same agency that is behind its agents plotting to kill Julian in the embassy, kidnap him, targeting his lawyers, spying on his legal meetings, even targeting our 6-month-old baby. So does anyone doubt that this agency would not recommend putting Julian in special administrative measures once he's in the United States?
Gabriel, I know you know Stella, and wanted to ask you, obviously, she's been suffering along with her children, but what's your response to what she was saying? Because it kind of seems pretty obvious to me whether Julian Assange is in Supermax or not. They'll find a way to say, he was not on good behavior, he, breathed or looked the wrong way at guards, and toss him into, a cell.
Yeah, that's why, these assurances are just, they're sort of laughable in a way because they come with a caveat. And in that caveat, the decision can be made by an intelligence officer. They can say, we think that Julian is going to leak a name of an informant or an intelligence officer, so therefore we need to put him in SAMS. So it's just, there's no court proceeding, there's no proof that needs to be, it's not like the lawyers argue over it or anything like that. It's just an administrative thing. So they contact the warden and in SAMS he goes. So it's, it's totally laughable, the assurances that have been given. And this, the headline I think that we're seeing, the New York Times is saying, oh, Julian can serve his sentence in Australia. That was always available under those treaties. It's been always available to Julian since forever. It's available to every Australian. But that only happens after sentencing. So, Julian could be extradited to the US. He could spend 10 years fighting up to the Supreme Court. That's 10 years in SAMS or 10 years in solitary confinement. And then finally, after that, he can go and serve his sentence in Australia. It's just laughable. The whole basis of the appeal, the judge didn't accept two of the parts. I'm amazed that they accepted the other because, there's a time and again, these assurances have been broken by the US government when in these extradition cases. But and Julian's suffering. He's in a maximum security prison this whole time. He won his case. He won his extradition case in January. He was denied bail a few days later, and he's been in this prison, in a maximum security prison, for the last 6 months. He's an innocent man. He's not been sentenced or anything. He's in this prison with the most violent prisoners in the UK, and he's a publisher.
And this might be a dumb question, Kevin, but I genuinely don't know. I don't really get, murder is murder, right? If an Australian citizen commits murder in America, you're charged under American law. But it never really made sense to me how they're charging an Australian citizen with violations of US law or, espionage or this and that. But now they're saying, oh yeah, he could serve time. He could serve, the duration of the time in Australia. It just seems like a very inconsistent thing that an Australian citizen. By the way, what is the Australian government doing about this? Absolutely nothing. An Australian citizen is being charged under the Espionage Act in America, but if he's convicted, then he won't have to be in American prison, despite what Gabriel just said, which obviously, if he was going to be moved to an Australian prison, it would not be for a very long time. How is, isn't that a basic contradiction?
When you look at how the Australian government has so supremely failed Julian Assange in protecting him, it's possible that in these private conversations, one of the things they said is, we would like our citizen to come back home and serve any sentence in Australia. And that actually amounts to what they consider to be protecting him and his rights. That I would believe that the people, this public officials and the corruption in Australia is so bad that they actually believe that this amounts to protecting one of their own by saying to the US government, we want Julian Assange to come back to Australia if he is convicted in the US, which is not protecting your citizen at all. Because as you say, how can you be expected to follow this law when you are not a US citizen? I mean, let's just go down this very quickly because this is important. This is at the core of the case. Julian Assange never signed a non-disclosure agreement at any US government agency. He never signed anything where he agreed to a secrecy oath. He never agreed to follow any secrecy laws in the United States. Now, that's something that Chelsea Manning did. That's something that Edward Snowden did. That's something that other whistleblowers who have been pursued, and we can talk about their cases separately. And I don't think that it's good for them to be targeted and punished, but they actually signed non-disclosure agreements. Julian Assange never agreed to not release and publish information. And that's because he's a journalist, and journalists don't have to keep information secret. They're allowed under the First Amendment and under our own principles of freedom of the press to publish this information because it is in the public interest. But you also have simultaneously, as they are charging Julian Assange under this US law, even though he is an Australian, you also have them out of the same corners of their mouth suggesting that he doesn't have First Amendment rights. That's what the Trump administration was doing. You had Mike Pompeo as CIA director and people like Jeff Sessions, who was the attorney general, who revived this investigation and put things on a path towards charging Julian Assange. You have people there saying, oh, he's not a journalist, and also he doesn't have First Amendment rights because he's not a US citizen and stuff like that. Well, but you're charging him with a US law. So if you're charged under US laws, then you have the rights that come with those US laws.